guys in the dark.
The first time I remember meeting Mary was when I was walking through the hall of our church. I knew a lot of the adults there and generally felt safe. I was walking down a hallway when this woman stuck her head out of a supply closet and started talking to me, asking me to come over, and started giving me the whole, "You're a good kid, why don't you help me with some sort of spiel?" And she knew my name without me telling her. I was about 5, or had just turned 6, and particularly aware of stranger danger, but couldn't decide if I should be creeped out or not. There was this strange lady seemingly hiding in a closet asking me to come over to her. How is that not sketchy? But this was church, and church was supposed to be safe, wasn't it? Somehow she managed to coax me over to the closet. It turned out that she was trying to fill in birthdays of the kids in my class, so that they could be given little gifts when it was their birthday, and she assumed I would know all their birthdays for some reason. When she found out I didn't, she settled for asking me when my birthday was. I got kind of cagey, because I knew better than to give out information about myself, and that was one of the specific things my mother had told me not to divulge to strangers. But then she claimed to already know that my birthday was in April. Wrong, in fact. That's about 6 months off. I told her she was wrong, but didn't feel right about telling her the truth, particularly because I felt that her false guess and offers of future birthday gifts was some kind of ploy. But when I wouldn't divulge my real birthday, she called me a liar. And then she threatened to tell all my teachers what a liar I was if I didn't tell her what my real birthday was. That was the point when I ran to go find my mom and explained to her that there was a strange woman in the supply closet who was asking for my personal information and threatening to get me in trouble if I didn't tell her. She came to confront the weirdo, and only to realize that they already knew each other. The woman, Mary, was someone who helped around the church, and basically everyone knew her. Mary laughed off my claims and assured my mom that I was exaggerating, and of course she would never threaten a kid with something like that. And my mother believed her. My mom explained the fact that my birthday was indeed not in April, but came away from the conversation with the idea that I was paranoid and just overreacted to someone asking me for my birth month. Either right before that, or right after, I had another incident with this woman, but didn't realize at the time that she was the same person. Similar to before, only not in a closet. This woman, Mary, came up and struck up a conversation with me, saying that she knew how much I loved to help out my teachers. And wouldn't I like to be able to help out even more? The obvious answer was definitely yes. Long story short, she was organizing some kind of teachers' conference in this cabin in the way of the woods. They weren't allowed to have a lit sign, but she was worried that a normal cardboard sign wouldn't be visible at night. So she had decided that the best solution would be to take out the little kids from the church, dress them up in an angel costume, and have them stand next to the sign for hours using a small switch to turn a light on when cars approached, and then turn it off when it wasn't by definition a continuously lit light. This woman would have worked in sales. I did not see anything wrong with this scenario, and excitedly went to tell my mother about this fantastic opportunity I had just been given to help someone. She seemed much less enthused, pointing out that this would be outside in October when the average temperature at night was under 55 degrees. I would be standing outside, alone, freezing my butt off, and getting eaten alive by mosquitoes just to flip a switch so that she could bend the rules about not having an electric sign. There would apparently be no one there to make sure that I was safe from wild animals or any human predator who would happen to drive along and spot a random kid out by themselves in the middle of the night. My mom tracked down Mary and gave her a pretty thorough overview of her opinion about the whole thing. Mary said something like, "Well, fine. I can just go get some other kid to do it then," which prompted my mom to go to the pastor and tell him that this lady was trying to do. He was a nice guy with 3 girls of his own and put a stop to the whole plan immediately. I could tell Mary was upset with me after having supposedly told on her and putting an end to this weird scheme of hers, but since I didn't really know her, I didn't really care at the time. Of course, after those 2 incidences, all my teachers became a lot more chilly towards me, and one especially tactless woman flat out told me that she had been warned about me. Come to find out that Mary had gotten her revenge on me for effectively embarrassing her twice by making good on her threat to tell everyone I was a troublemaker and a liar. Even though by that point my mother had already told her that I had been telling her the truth about my birthday not being in April. What a witch. I'd like to say it ended there, but of course it didn't. My family stayed in the area, and she continued helping with various social functions, so inevitably she ran into each other several times. One of the most outrageous things she ever did, I was 12, and my mother had decided to enroll me in some kind of VBS summer school sort of thing. Surprise, surprise, Mary was the main coordinator. This place was so screwed up. Not perverted or anything, but just the sheer magnitude of poor planning was incredible. Lunches were provided, but it was weird stuff like Go-Gurt and Slim pears that had a texture like raw fish. Basically, all the kids hated everything they served us. On one occasion, I was served SpaghettiOs and tried to make the best out of it because at least it was better than the pears. Only to find out that Mary had slipped gummy worms in before microwaving them, and they had melted into the SpaghettiOs. When she found out I didn't like her prank, she ridiculed me for not being able to take a joke and insisted that I eat it anyway. Bitch. At some point, it had also been decided that the schedule would not be flexible to any degree. All age groups were expected to get something like half an hour outside every day. Bear in mind the state where this took place was unpredictable, sometimes extreme weather. So this included days when it was pouring rain out and our breath was fogging up in front of our faces. They'd pitch one of those little event tents and force us to sit outside under it in little plastic chairs until our half hour of outdoor play was up. Even this one girl whose father had told the teachers beforehand not to make her go outside because she had a fever, naturally she got worse. They called him to pick her up, and he chewed the teachers out before taking her home. It was also including days where temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We'd be forced to line up alongside the building so that we could stand in the shade of the eaves of the roof, because it was particularly too hot to be in the sun, and none of us had access to water or any sunscreen. I wish I was joking about this. We had 3 kids drop from heat stroke in the same day, and had to be taken by ambulance to the hospital. The sheriff personally came out and gave the teachers a massive tongue lashing, threatening to shut the place down if any other kids came to the hospital from there. Of course, then they decided it was okay to bend the rules and keep everyone indoors instead of forcing them outside. There is a point to me mentioning all of this, and that is so that you understand the context behind what happened next. My mother was working overtime, and Mary had volunteered to drive me to the summer camp since she was there every day. On this day, she had her niece and nephews in the back seat with me. Where this place was, it was out near the edge of town and mostly surrounded by crop fields, which wasn't in use. The area had a decent amount of traffic, but there weren't many buildings close by. On the left-hand side of the building, there were nothing but fields, or maybe 2 or 3 acres. On the right-hand side, a tiny farmhouse, and beyond that, a pawn shop where there was a gas station. So I was in the back of Mary's van with these other kids, and we happened to look out as we were passing the pawn shop, which hasn't opened yet, and there's a scraggly bearded man stalking around outside with a rifle or shotgun in his hands. Not like I wonder if it's open so I can sell my gun, but like he was either the owner and thought an intruder had broken in, or he was the intruder that was in the process of breaking in. We all started telling her in a panic about this guy, and she just tells us to be quiet, and tells me that she knows I put them up to it, and that when we get there, she's going to tell all the teachers not to listen to me. That day, inexplicably, the schedule that was never changed unless the sheriff threatened the teachers was randomly changed so that my class was sent outside immediately, instead of later in the afternoon, and the doors to the buildings were locked so that we couldn't go back inside even to use the restroom. I spent like an hour fearing for my life because I knew that if the guy had robbed the pawn shop and tried to escape on foot, there was nowhere for him to run. I even begged to call my mom, and Mary refused to let me anywhere near the phone, saying that my mom had better things to do than be bothered by my stories. So yeah, basically, the coordinator of the summer school changed the whole schedule for the day, and locked a bunch of us kids outside just to get back at me for reporting seeing a man with a gun nearby, and also forbidden me from contacting my parents, which was never supposed to do. My mom was ticked when she picked me up and learned that I had been forbidden from calling her when I felt I needed to, although she didn't realize the full context of the situation until later when I had a chance to explain it better. It doesn't even end there, though. I wish it did, because the last part was the worst series of events that had ever happened to me. I guess it was kind of a perfect storm. From 6 to 10 years old, I had been best friends with this boy, whom I'll call Michael. Not boyfriend-girlfriend, but real, true best friends. I don't think we ever really argued about anything, except for maybe his father, who seemed nice, but always seemed to try to spin whatever I said into some kind of innuendo so that he would complain to me about my parents. Like getting on my case about having mentioned the term pussy willow once, or claiming that the word pooter was grossly offensive, when he knew that was the alternative my parents made me use instead of fart. I got some weird vibes from him, but not enough to warrant his own post. Michael and I were inseparable up until his family decided to move 3 states away, after which they only occasionally dropped in to visit every couple of years. When I was 14, they dropped in to visit again, and so on Saturday I was invited to stay over at the home where they were staying while they were in town to catch up with him. I had also been friends with a girl I'll call Julie, who was also my age, and Michael had been friends with Julie's younger brother Nate, who was his age as well. So Julie and Nate and their parents were also there visiting with Michael and his family. I had grown apart from Julie due to other reasons, but having everyone back together was fantastic. I was on cloud 9 all day. Julie's younger brother had been a bit of a handful when he was little. He had temper tantrums, kicked small animals, randomly screamed at me a couple of times, and would sometimes cry for no reason while claiming that somebody else had hurt him. He was severely bullied by his sister, so I never took any of it personally, or really considered it was my fault. Since I hadn't seen much of him or his sister in years by this point, I had no idea how he was getting along, but because he was so much more grown up, I assumed he'd just grown out of it. That afternoon we all played tag in the front yard, which was sort of a U shape and surrounded by hedges. At some point I lost sight of the others. I guess they had gone inside or something. I was at the end of the U that was near the garage door, playing fetch with Michael's dog and his big walking stick, when I heard Julie's mom call my name from the other side of the U, which was near the house's front door. I took the stick because I thought leaving it lying around would just be rude, and started running around the U. Apparently when Julie's mom had opened the door and called my name, Nate had darted out the door and came running around the U to come find me. Only he didn't say anything, and I didn't know he was there. We were both closer to the inside of the bend, and when we reached the middle, there was no chance to stop. We ran straight into each other. He landed flat on his back, and I nearly fell over too. His chin hit me hard in the collar, though. We just stared at each other in shock for a second. Finally, I reached a hand forward to help him up, and asked if he was okay. Immediately, his eyes filled with tears. He started screaming, seemingly in pain, and in absolute terror, and turned around and bolted back the way he'd come. I knew he had to be bruised at least as badly as me, but was also totally confused. The way he was crying, I was afraid he might have broken an arm or a leg or something else. But if he was hurt that bad, then how could he have run so fast? Or if he was afraid, what was he afraid of? I ran after him feeling there was an axe murderer behind me or something. I reached the door, but nobody was there, and it was closed and locked. I knocked, and Michael's mother answered it. She saw me still holding the walking stick and looked confused, but let me inside the house. I could hear Nate screaming and crying in the kitchen. His mother had him up on the counter and was looking him over, trying to figure out what was wrong with him. She seemed just as confused and scared about the whole thing as I was, and then he saw me and immediately pointed and screamed, "She beat me with a stick!" He just screamed the same thing over and over. I didn't know what to do, but but seeing me seemed to make him hysterical, so I left him with his mother in the kitchen. I wanted to go find Michael and the others, but Michael's mom refused to let me go up downstairs where he and the others were. So I just stood by myself in the foyer next to the door and tried not to panic. Maybe Nate hadn't grown out of crying a wolf about other people hurting him, but this was way different from what he had been like when he did that as a little kid. This time he seemed hysterical, and he seemed like he legitimately believed that he was saying. I had been holding the stick when we ran into each other, and even though I certainly didn't hit him with it, maybe he didn't understand what really happened. I tried to go back into the kitchen, thinking that I could try to explain to his mom what had happened, but Michael's father stopped me. I don't even know where he came from. I must have been really freaked out because of my perspective. It seemed like he had just appeared in my way. He told me not to go into the kitchen. I tried to explain that I needed to talk to Nate's mother and explain, very shakily, that Nate had been telling her that I had attacked him. So Michael's father asked, "Did you?" I told him no, of course not. He pointed out that I didn't seem to be hurt at all, which I refuted, telling him that I had gotten my own bruises from running into Nate. He asked for me to show him. I said no. He asked why. I pointed out unnecessarily. I think that I was a 14-year-old girl, so I couldn't just take off my shirt. He asked me why again, and persisted in stating that I needed to show him, and that if I didn't, he couldn't help me because I refused to give him any reason to think that I was innocent. This miserable sod who had known me growing up, and had allegedly been a close friend of my family for years, and knew that I had never hit another kid in my life, was essentially trying to blackmail me into undressing in front of him. I still feel angry just thinking about it, because the entire time my family had known him, he had always come off as this perfect, kind, and caring father, and he had always found things to nitpick at whenever I said. Even as a first grader who didn't know what sex was, somehow I was allegedly spouting all kinds of innuendos all the time. And now this? I've learned as an adult that people who talk excessively about a topic generally do so because it occupies their own mind too frequently. And it makes me wonder if maybe that wasn't his problem all along. If not, I don't know how to explain anything. All I know is that night, it was like everyone I knew had gone insane at the same time. But I did say no to him and went into the kitchen. More to get away from him than anything else. Nate's mother was still frazzled, but started to seem more exasperated than anything else. Somehow he still hadn't stopped crying. I asked her to please call my mom to come pick me up. That hadn't been the plan. The plan was that I was to stay until after dinner, but I couldn't handle the situation anymore. She could see that I was shaking, and agreed. I asked Michael's mother if I could say goodbye to any of the others, but she didn't want me anywhere near them. My mom was tense and quiet all the way home, and I was afraid of what she might have been told over the phone. She asked me once if there was anything I wanted to tell her. I panicked and just said no. The next day was Sunday. I habitually stayed with the adults instead of going to the teens class because the teacher, who was coincidentally Mary's husband, picked on me sometimes. In retrospect, I should have spoken up about that, but I was an insecure teen, thought I might be oversensitive, and wasn't really sure how much of what he said would be considered harmless ribbing. The end result was that I didn't see Julie, so I had no idea how the situation with Nate had resolved until after church was over. The phrase "news spread like wildfire" doesn't even begin to fit the bill. It was like everyone had developed telepathy. I overheard part of the story from Nate's mother while she was telling it to Mary. Nate had continued to insist that even after I left that I had savagely attacked and beat him for no reason. He had some pretty nice green bruises that seemed to back up his claims. Nate's mother was completely unnerved by how sincere he seemed, and was torn between believing him and believing me. While I hadn't been there, Julie had told all the girls in my class that I had attacked her brother. Michael told me that he didn't know if he believed that, if I had done it or not. But his parents refused to let him stay in contact with me because they were both certain I was guilty. Julie and Nate's parents had wanted to talk to my mother to try to resolve whatever had happened, because they were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, but they wouldn't find my mom and didn't want to take the time looking for her because they had left Nate home alone and were eager to get back to him. So instead, they told the whole story about what had happened to Mary, trusting she would never convey the whole situation to my mother. How long is this motherfucker? That was not what happened. Mary changed the story. Now it was Nate's parents, herself, and Michael's parents who all knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was guilty, with the added insinuation that it might not have been just an assault, because apparently that wasn't good enough for her. Yeah, she decided to play that card just for the sheer fun of it. By the time I had started to realize that the issue with Nate was still an issue, half the people in church had already been told what an awful, despicable person I was. The head of the youth ministry personally sat me down to tell me how unacceptable my behavior was. I had former teachers I hadn't seen since first grade coming out of the woodwork to tell me how disappointed they were in me. Everyone flat out refused to hear my side of the story. They already knew everything, they said. Nothing I said could make up for what I did. Mary had already told them I was a rebellious, lying kid, a troubled child, and had stuck to that story over the years, including during the pawn shop incident. So it seemed like there was this precedence. She'd been building off the same claims about me for 8 years by this point. Why would anyone believe a lying, rebellious, troubled teenager over a charismatic adult who was always doing her part for the community? Mary was so disgusted with me that refused to speak to me. She specifically told her yarn to everyone about my mother. Having learned early on that my mom was not going to stand for baseless rumors and accusations about me, Mary was of that opinion that my mom was in denial about what an awful kid I really was. Mary's husband, my current youth teacher, somehow snowed me into thinking that my mom knew about everything, and that I shouldn't try to talk to her about it because she was so angry with me she could basically explode on me. I spent the next 2.5 years despised by almost everyone I knew. All the adults I knew were against me except for the pastor, who refused to take sides, and my mother. Mary's husband continued to make snide remarks, insinuations whenever he thought they were vague enough that other adults wouldn't know what he was talking about. All of the kids I knew who were in my age range shunned me, even when new kids came in who didn't know any better. They were quickly told to stay away from me, ruining my chance I had of making any new friends to replace the ones I had lost. Even random strangers in the grocery store would glare daggers at me, sneer at me, or just watch me with those creepy disapproval eyes. The shyness I'd always had became full-fledged social anxiety, complete with what I suspect was selective mutism. Because I was afraid of virtually all the adults I knew. Afraid of the little jabs they'd make at me. Afraid because I didn't know if my mom knew or not, and was afraid to find out. If she knew, if it was true that she was just so indifferent in reality that even though I knew she loved me, for some reason she still let everyone pick on me. It seems so stupid now that I was afraid of talking to her about it. If there were any one thing in my life I would choose to change, I would have told her immediately about it. But that isn't what happened, so I lived with it by myself. There were some mornings where I would just spend an hour in the shower crying my eyes out because I didn't want to have to go out and deal with anyone all over again. I don't know if you'll know what I mean when I say that I don't know if you'll know what I mean when I say having other people expect you to feel guilty is oppressive. When you laugh or smile or just feel normal, but they believe you should be ashamed of something and don't like it. For a while, I tried just not remembering what had happened. It is possible to make yourself forget something, but don't ever do that to yourself. Once you have a memory, you can't really destroy it. The best you can do is bury it. Part of your mind will still always know it's there. I still got all the same judgmental lurks and hurtful remarks. I just no longer understood why people were acting that way. And I had all kinds of awful nightmares until I finally dug those memories back up and faced them again. I got over it, but slowly. So many people who had known me the entire time I was growing up had immediately assumed the worst just because some gossip had told. I never knew who had been told and who hadn't. Every time I thought people had forgotten, Mary's husband would just make some new cutting remark, or someone else would, and I'd lose whatever sense of security I'd started to scrape together. It was only in my early 20s, a few years after we'd moved out of the state, that I finally found the courage to bring up the subject with my mother, which led to some interesting revelations. It turned out that Nate's mother hadn't divulged anything about what had happened over the phone. My mom had been tense on the drive home because of something totally unrelated to me, and had asked if I wanted to talk not because she thought I was guilty about anything, but because she could tell I was under stress of some kind. Mary's husband had lied through his teeth about her knowing what was going on, or being angry about it. She had never known. That was why Mary's husband had always tiptoed around the subject in her presence, because he or she knew she didn't know and wanted to keep it that way. It was particularly a conspiracy. My mom, the one person who actually had the right to know what had happened, had been denied the opportunity to try to make things right because everyone else was so busy judging me for themselves. And Nate's parents, the two people who actually had a semi-balanced view of that night, had no idea how bad things had gotten after they left that day because they didn't live in our area anymore and weren't there to see it. If they had, I'd like to think they would have put a stop to it. They were good people. I don't have nightmares anymore, and I feel more or less indifferent to the situation now. It's over a decade behind me at this point, but Mary and your husband, holy crap, I never want to meet either of you again for as long as I live. All of the stress and fear and heartache I've mentioned here, and that's still not even mentioning how much you badmouthed my mom behind her back, gushed over her cancer scare because it gave you something to gossip over, and generally treated us both like dirt. I never want to meet Michael's father ever again, because whether he is a pervert or just too dense to realize how wildly inappropriate he was being doesn't really matter at this point. Either way, it was still beyond creepy and wrong. Never meeting Michael again is still kind of painful to think about, but I guess it wouldn't really be helped. I even tried contacting him on Facebook a few years ago, but to no avail. I already know Julie and Nate never want to meet me again. I guess that makes this sort of a round robin. Let's not meet it. Whatever, I'm done. Fuck this.
I'm a 25-year-old female. For the purpose of being anonymous, I will refer to myself as Sabrina. I'm from Romania. English is not my native language, but I shall try my best to make the story easy to be understood. My stories contain that of what would be angels, spirits, demons, archangels, satanic people doing forbidden sessions of voodoo, and everything for this particular story. I sort of believe this is not necessarily a bad encounter, or so I lie to myself sometimes. I live in Romania. Our country has Orthodox religion, basically similar to Christianity. We believe in God and Jesus, with small certain similarities and differences. For example, I don't know if it's the same as Catholics do. We keep the deceased for a night. We call it the sleeping duty, or guard night. We do not take the body out of its house that he or she lived in for their entire life, in order to help the spirit find its way to heaven easier. The next 2 days, as we bury the bodies after about 3 days, we take the body to the church where loved ones, but not relatives to the deceased, may come and pay respects to that person. After this process is concluded, we bury the body at the cemetery where the priest will chant prayers, helping the spirit of the deceased understand that he or she is no longer among the living, as Romanians are very spiritual people, and believe in the afterlife, spirits, and even in bad spirits that linger the world unable to move on. Understanding this is important, as the story is pretty detailed. I had 5 grandparents, 3 grandmothers, and 2 grandfathers. My first grandfather, we'll call him Michael, died when I was 6 years old due to a heart attack in August of 2007. He raised me, and his death marked my life ever since because I couldn't grasp the significance of death. I would frequently dream about him, his messages, his signs. I would hear him in my dreams as he would guide me to be a good person, and so on. But even then, as a child, I knew what was a dream and what was reality. His wife, who we shall call Anna, was my adoptive grandmother, as my real, by-blood grandmother, name was Margaret, had died when my mom was 2 years old due to an abortion. I'm not sure if she was trying to abort my mother or a third child, since my mother has a brother, and she was the second child. During the communist years, Romania had a strict law regarding abortions, and women would abort the fetuses on their own, in the privacy of their homes by themselves, as no medic would agree to help with the procedure due to the fear of being sentenced to life in prison. She died, and my mother grew up without a mother until the age of 6 years old. Needless to say, I never met her or knew anything about Margaret, my blood grandmother. But this story is about my grandmother, my adoptive one, Anna. She was a very spiritual, wise, kind-hearted, and intellectual woman. She never had children of her own. She adopted my mom and uncle. Their names aren't important for this story. My grandfather, Michael, was only dating my grandmother, but after my mother had met her on a family visit on her side, in Moldova, it's a town in Romania, they got married soon after. My grandfather was a military general, and raising 2 children of 6 years and 13 years was hard. How they decided to get married? Well, it was thanks to my mother, because as soon as she first saw Grandma Anna, she went straight to her, at the age of 6, raised both her arms up, and asked in a jolly child voice, "Hi, my name is Christina. Would you like to be my mommy?" My grandmother burst in tears, picked her up, and immediately created a connection with my mother, whom she raised and loved as her own. It was not the same for my uncle, as he was 13 at that time, and knew his own mother. Margaret had died, and why? He denounced her, and made her life much harder. After raising my mom and uncle, my uncle had 2 children of her own, a boy and a girl. She raised the girl, and then the boy was born with a calcium crisis that made her faint and hit her head. She refused to raise my cousin afterwards, as she was afraid that she would drop holding the baby. My uncle never forgave her for that, and hated her even more. When I was born, I was the light of their life, as she loved my mother from moment one, and my grandfather, Michael, adored my mother. Because I'm a replica of my mother, same eyes, same face, body shape, they immediately took me in, raised me as my father worked in 3 different jobs. My mom was a pediatric nurse and worked in shifts. I loved growing up with her. Like I said, she was an extremely spiritual person. She loved to meditate. She would tell me about her dreams. She taught me how to decode them and what it meant. She told me about ghost encounters that she had in her life, and always told me not to fear any spirit that comes close to me in my life, because ghosts see us as beams of light guiding them to God when they are confused. She did this until I was 18 years old. We were very close, and I was living 5 minutes away from her, so I could visit her daily, sometimes still sleep at her place. Her hobby was to read the future in some cards that she owned, not tarot cards, but normal cards with some inscriptions that she had, such as Encounter with Mysterious Man, Beware, Crying Child, Careful, Dangerous Woman. On New Year of 2017, at 3:15 a.m., I called my grandma to wish her a Happy New Year, and to let her know how much I and my family loved her and appreciated her. I'd like to mention that Romanians rarely express their love by saying "I love you" to our mothers, fathers, grandparents. We consider that you show your love by what you do in your life and how you respect them rather than just say the words. But that night, for the first time in 23 years, I felt the need to tell her that. I still don't know why. Her voice changed. You could hear her chuckle in soft, happy tears as she would hear that, and said that she loved us all back and forever will. Nothing seemed suspicious, as I'm a very sensitive and emotional woman myself. So the night went on normally. She was at a party. I was with my fiancé at his house. The next day, 1st of January, I received a phone call from my father who told me that Grandma Anna had died the previous night. I couldn't express in words how my heart simply left my body, as if my own existence had stopped, refusing to acknowledge that she was dead. I rushed home. The police was there. The ambulance was there. They said that she died of a heart attack due to the climate change, same as my grandfather Michael did 11 years before her by the same cause. But what I found weird was the time of death. I still had her last phone call at 3:15 a.m. The policeman and ambulance staff analyzed her and declared that it was around midnight. They said that there was no way I could have talked to her at 3:15 a.m., as for by that time, the body would have already begun to rigor mortis. Who did I talk to then? Because it was her phone number. It was her voice. She seemed incredibly fine. Call it a sick joke, or just medical staff TOD. During her funeral, I decided to write her a goodbye letter, as I am very spiritual, and even though no one will read it, I like to consider that she took the message I had for her in heaven to pass it down to my other grandmother, Margaret, and 2 grandfathers, Michael and Peter. I wrote it in that letter that I do love her a lot, that I thank her for every sacrifice that she has done for me, and that I wish to tell Margaret, the real grandmother which I have never met because she died from the abortion long before I was born, that I loved her too, although I never met her. I put that letter in my grandmother's coffin, kissed her forehead, and watched her go on to her last road. My mom knows about the letter. She has yet to ask me about what I wrote in it. After the funeral, I got a phone call from my grandmother. Yes, my grandmother Anna. At first, I thought it was my father, as he would still use her phone to let all our relatives from other countries know that she had died. So normally I answered the phone, and I hear something unimaginable, impossible, formidable. I hear my Anna. I hear her voice clearly. I hear her laughing voice, with some static occurring whenever she would pause. It was a soft, fading voice, but nothing scary, nothing fearful or intimidating. It made me feel like she was indeed there, but I will admit the whole situation did freak me out. She said to me, "Hello, dear. I called to let you know that I passed the message, and I love you too." I couldn't reply as the phone call hung up right after. It left me feeling so vulnerable, as I thought maybe someone is playing a sick joke on me. But it couldn't be that. I saw my Nana be buried. Myself. I saw the coffin be sealed. I saw the letter exit inside the coffin until the very last second. No one took it out to read it. She had 3 sisters, but they were all dead, and none of them had her voice. No one could have repeated her voice that perfectly. But the even scarier part comes after that first phone call. After another week. I remember it was during another day of Monday, right 1 week after the first phone call. My phone starts ringing again under the same number. I answer. Already have forgotten about what has happened, and I hear an old lady, a voice that I couldn't feel familiar. I did not know who that lady was. It was a pretty soft but strong voice. It felt like a relatively young woman, but inexperienced. I would say around 30 to 40 years or so. I would like to mention that this time I was in the same room with my father, who owned her phone still, and I received the call. Her phone is in front of me on the table, and not ringing. I open her phone as I speak to my phone. Her phone had no battery, and it was dead closed, but I still get her phone call. I answer. I hear this weird lady, and she goes like this. "Hello, sweetheart. You don't know me, but I know you. I received the message, and I love you too." Then the phone call hangs up again. Needless to say, I started screaming and panicking so hard that my dad immediately went to the telephone service to find out who was playing pranks on us. They went through their profile, numbers dialed, and received. My number was not in the agenda of calls, so we decided to disable her number. Ever since then, we do not receive phone calls anymore, but I do go to the cemetery more often and talk to them. This year is the first year from her death, so we are now sort of celebrating her memory. But for me, personally, I do not celebrate her memory as I feel she is constantly physically with me. I often have dreams of her. She would often visit me at night. I'm saying dreams because I feel like I'm going insane if I ever conclude to these situations being something other than dreams. I guess I'm trying to say thank you for giving me the possibility to share this with you. To all the people out there who encounter ghosts or paranormal activity, I'm going to say what my grandmother Anna taught me all my life. Do not be afraid of them, as they are just confused, lost souls who see you as beams of light helping them to find God. The way you feel about them will conclude in the way that they react, and afterwards end up scaring you.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.